Cool. So I'd just like to welcome everyone along to VDAO's monthly Twitter Spaces. And for those that are new to VDAO, we're a community of ecosystem builders, and we're focused on leading a paradigm shift towards decentralized, anti-fragile, and regenerative network states. And we're really excited to welcome three guests today with lots of experience in the Web3 funding world. And we've got Ben West from Thrive Protocol and Gitcoin Grants Lab, Tara Stafford of Elephant in the Room and Climate Coordination Network, and John Ruth from Spark Eco and the Climate Coordination Network. And I'll let them introduce themselves in a few moments. But as I'm sure most of you, or many of you will know, and Ben alluded to this already in the introduction, the Gitcoin's grant round 20 kicked off today, and it's got $1.4 million available in match funding. And Ben's going to drop some links in the comments if you want to find out more about these rounds. And I'm sure we'll be touching on that today as the conversation unfolds. Our plan today is to dive into Web3 funding in detail and cover some of the different ways that funding and grants are distributed in the Web3 space. If anyone has any questions at all, just drop them in the comments. We'll pick them up in the Q&A section at the end. And yeah, before we kick off, I just want to thank our guests for joining today, because I know all three of you have been like super busy and focused on GG20 and making it a huge success. So we really appreciate that you guys took the time today out of your busy schedule to join us for this conversation. And yeah, we're really excited to dive into Web3 funding. So without further ado, let's kick off with some introductions. Maybe I can come to you first, Ben. I'm wondering if you could introduce yourself and maybe tell us a little bit about your why. Like, what was it that drew you into the Web3 funding space?
Right on, man. Happy to be here. Thanks for the invite. Really cool what you guys are doing, and happy to be part of the conversation with a bunch of great folks. Let me see. I'll try to give you the Coles Notes version of the why. Really came down to a friend of mine who, introduced me to crypto way back in like 2013. Tara from Elephant Room there is one of my very good friends who go back a really long way. She remembers me probably buying some Bitcoin at a Bitcoin ATM in like 2015, which I just cashed out like when it hit 69,420, because I mean, how do you not cash out at 69,420? Yeah, I mean, I honestly had a lot to do with like a kind of a counterculture vision, sort of concern about the big banks. I've always been an activist and a community organizer. So, I've come at crypto, I think, in a very different way than a lot of people have, less as a sort of an investment opportunity and more as a sort of revolutionary social movement. So maybe we can talk more about that later.
Sounds good. Tara, really curious to hear more about you and your journey into the Web3 funding space.
Oh, God. And you can't even imagine how different mine is than everybody's. So I come from a background of being a screenwriter, and then ventured more and more into the climate world and became a full-time climate campaigner, communicator, working on all kinds of different projects, everything from business-related things to community things to activism and all over the map. And I basically got pulled into the Web3 funding world and just Web3 in general by Ben, kicking and screaming, I might add. And I oftentimes act as the litmus test for everything that's going on. So, if there's any kind of stuff around the UX or anything that has to do with people that aren't in Web3 world, I'm the person that generally doesn't understand and can articulate how I don't understand this. So, and I've been working with Gitcoin for the last couple of years, I guess, and now we are the Climate communication or climate coordination network. We've graduated onto our own thing, and so we've been doing that for the last 2 rounds, which has been fantastic. And I think also I come at this from the point of view of having been funded in Web3 world for a bunch of different things. So that's been interesting. And I'll pass it on over to John, I imagine.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having us all. Excited for the conversation. My name's John Ruth. Let's see, my journey into Web3 and Web3 funding, I guess starts, 2016-17, riding the tail end of that bull and getting bit by the bear pretty heavily, and recognizing that, maybe just being a degen gambler is not all it's cracked up to be. Kind of watched crypto in the periphery for a couple of years, and then really got back into it in like 2020, 2021-ish. And I think the first thing that really struck me was how much more mature the tools were, which is still somewhat laughable, because even as mature as they've become in some respects, there's still a real big pain in the ass, and UI suck, and it's still terrible to use crypto in a lot of ways. But compared to 16 and 17, it certainly came a long way. And my background is actually in solar energy, and so I was working in the solar energy industry, building large-scale utility solar projects around, primarily in the U.S. Built about 400 megawatts of solar, which is just basically as solar as far as your eyes can see, for those that can't conceptualize what that might mean. And really started to look initially at how we might use these tools for good is really, I guess, where I came back to crypto. And then really the journey into funding kind of starts as a grantee in GR 13 or 14, I think it was when I submitted my first grant to Gitcoin. And so I was a grantee for a couple of rounds. And then my good buddy Ben pinged in one of the thousands of telegrams I'm in, and was just like, hey, is anybody looking to maybe help out with the climate round in the future? And was like, sure. And so I started joining some weekly calls with Tara and Ben and a great team of folks, and quickly became one of my favorite calls of the week, and really went from there to becoming a contributor at Gitcoin. And then unfortunately a few months back was laid off from Gitcoin, so not officially with Gitcoin anymore, but am fortunate enough to still work with the Climate Coordination Network and still support the climate round through that work. So so a lot of grant programs on the grantee side, and then a lot of time behind the driver's seat of reviews and running and operating, managing rounds as well. So, but that's probably a good starting place for the conversation.
Thanks a lot, guys. I'm really picking up the kind of importance of the relationship you guys have formed in this space over the years as you've been building out Gitcoin and going through these different grant rounds. That's like coming across so strongly. And also this theme I'm picking up around UX and accessibility. I know that's something that a number of members of the VDAO community are really interested in. Like, how do we improve the Web3 UX? How do we make it more accessible to new users that are not familiar with Web3? So I think there's a lot we can explore, but let's dive in with the first question for you guys. I'm curious if I wanted to request a grant for my Web3 project, hypothetically, what are my options, and what's the best way to go about it? Wondering if you can walk me through the process of applying for a Gitcoin or any Web3 grant.
Well, they all vary a little bit, but maybe focusing in on Gitcoin, particularly given that the round has just begun, and actually still a little time for folks to apply in case there is maybe a project out there that would love to jump into the round even a day or two late. I think it's going to start with, a lot of our grantees really do start as ideas. Maybe they've built a very small software tool or done a little bit of IRL work, but for the most part, it's just this idea of like, hey, I'm going to use this technology to do X, and I could use just like a little bit of funding so that I feel good about devoting a little bit of my precious time on this project. And so you would want to, develop a grant proposal. And for Gitcoin grants, one of the, I actually think kind of cool things is that there really is no format for that. So, for some folks, that means it's more daunting because they don't have the 10 questions they need to answer. But at the same time, it kind of just allows you to tell the story of your idea. What's the problem? What's the solution you're going to come up with? Who are you? Who else is working with you? These kinds of like high level things that you would want to detail out about your idea. And then with the way Gitcoin runs now, we have a whole bunch of, a few rounds run inside of Gitcoin, but then a whole bunch of community rounds. And while there is grant rounds happening all the time in between our sort of main cadence, there's the quarterly cadence that is sort of the big, we kind of call it the quarterly Super Bowl of grants, if you will. And so, leading up to that, you'd probably keep an eye out that, there's a couple of rounds that might be a great fit for you. Maybe it's a climate project and the climate round with the climate coordination is a good fit, but maybe it's more of a software project. So maybe like the open source software and might be a better fit for you. And you would submit your grant. It's kind of a two-part process in terms of Gitcoin. So you're going to create that grant in what's called the Builder. It's a tool that they've developed for like creating the grant and getting the images and some of those things in, and then just apply to the round, similar to you'd apply kind of for anything. I think the main difference maybe in touching on like other grant rounds, because I have received some grant funding from other sources outside of Gitcoin. Most of those are a little more structured, that they have a specific ask that they're trying to fund projects that are doing X, Y, and Z. And if you're doing X, Y, and Z or some portion of that and you think your project might fit, they're going to usually then have some sort of an application where you're going to fill out and give them a whole bunch of information, answer some hard questions about your idea, all those sorts of things, submit that in. There's going to be sort of this black box in there where they all review. And then at some point they're going to tell you either got some money or you didn't, and you're going to go from there. So I think that's one of the differences as well, as over time we've become more and more transparent with the process at Gitcoin and with CCN in terms of providing as much feedback as we can to the grantees should they not be accepted. And then I guess you mainly question was about applying, so maybe I'll pause there, given that was kind of a long-winded explanation, but
it's super helpful. I think it kind of lays out the process. And I guess I'm noticing some similarities with this process and a kind of traditional grants application in perhaps like the NGO world or like any grants funding space, in that you put together your grant application and then you submit it and it gets reviewed and so on. I'm wondering, and this is a question to all three of you, what is it about Web3 that's unique or different compared to real world grants or philanthropy?
I'll just give a quick piece on that, and then I'll probably get Ben to elaborate. But one of the things that's interesting is, the review process is probably in some ways similar to what happens in a traditional grant, but then what happens after that is nothing like a traditional grant, because in the Gitcoin world, what's happening is people are basically voting for your project with their dollars, and then later it's being matched in a thing called quadratic funding, which I'll get Ben to speak on that, with other money after the round is over. So it's completely different than just getting a foundation giving you money because they decide you're doing a good project. In this world, what you're having is a whole bunch of people that are looking at your project going, oh, I think that's interesting. And they're donating in small little bits. Usually it's only $1 each. And that is goes to the fact that there's the more people that are donating, the better you do, not necessarily the more money you're getting donated to you. And over to Ben.
Thanks, Tara. Over to you, Ben. First of all, I just want to say how much I just love being on a space with you, Tara. And not to go down this kind of like love in here, but Tara and I have been working together for a long, long time. And if you told me years ago that she would be talking about crypto on a Twitter space, I would not have believed you. And just to speak to how cool she is, she did 2 years worth of research for the Ethereum Foundation and didn't even mention it in her introduction of herself, which I just find pretty awesome. But anyway, the question was like, what makes Web3 donations different? To me, the core thing really is the values of decentralization. Like what makes Gitcoin different is that, we're basically trusting the wisdom of the crowd, harnessing, a group of people's collective wisdom and some, funky math and code to make decisions, and that's kind of the amazing thing about Gitcoin grants is that all these matching fund partners, it's been tons of different people, over the time I was at Gitcoin, ranging from like UNICEF and the American Cancer Society to Shell and A16Z and pretty much every big crypto entity you can think of, putting hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars into the Gitcoin grants program, and then just really trusting the community to determine the best way to allocate those funds, which to me is like just totally fascinating. And I think the end result is a lot of very different things get funded. That's kind of the beauty of many Web3 funding programs, even if they're not using quadratic funding, more traditional direct grants funding, is just that there's this spirit of experimentation and exploration. It's a very much cutting edge space overall. So, people are looking for what's new, what's interesting, where's the opportunity. And that plays itself out in all kinds of interesting ways in various different programs. But, really at its core, I think it's a cultural thing.
So interesting. So I think from what you guys are saying, the unique add of the Web3 technology is a decentralization piece. It enables that coordination to happen within the community so that they can determine where the best place is for that funding to go. Is that kind of what you guys are saying?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, there's definitely differences from one community to another as well. Like, I mean, not all of Web3 is, cut from the same cloth. Definitely a wide range of different sub-communities with different interests and different approaches. But at least in my experience, what I've seen is, just generally a tendency towards kind of earlier stage, innovative projects, sort of a higher risk tolerance and a real belief in sort of the value of decentralization and community participation. I think those are the common threads, if that answers your question.
Absolutely. So I'm curious to explore a bit more about like what kind of projects are being funded through these methods. And in particular, I'm wondering, like, is this kind of unique funding mechanism that you've described with the quadratic funding, is that only for digital projects, like software projects, or can it also be applied to real world projects?
Can absolutely be applied to a wide range of things. In fact, the very first project that Tara and I brought to Gitcoin was actually funding some indigenous activists fighting a pipeline, believe it or not, and actually found a ton of new people and new funders. And for anybody in the sort of more traditional nonprofit space, finding new communities that are like open and interested to supporting you, is pretty critical. And I guess that's one of the other things about this world is it does tend to have a very different subset of people in it than, people who might be funding stuff in the meat space, so to speak. So I think just in and of itself, like it very much just depends on how a round is designed. I mean, we're talking a lot about Gitcoin, but I mean, there's of course lots of people using tools like the giving block, just give directly in ETH to all kinds of different causes. And increasingly, tools like Giveth, which is also a sort of a similar Web3 giving platform, as well as Gitcoin now, even just, based on the most recent tweet I saw from Owaki, the founder of Gitcoin, talking about some of the new features, there's increasingly actually efforts to like use quadratic funding mechanisms, but with fiat, and to make it possible to actually use fiat as kind of the mechanism for actually exchanging value, while still using the quadratic funding algorithm and the blockchain rails to facilitate the process overall. So I mean, definitely lots of different ways this can be done. I've been involved in a couple of different experiments that were very much tied to like an entire round being IRL. One example being the round that we ran for support for Ukraine, where people were sending funding directly to people in Ukraine. At one point, kind of earlier in that conflict, there was actually more money coming directly in crypto donations, than was coming from governments around the world. Just people acting quickly and being able to use Web3 tools to get cash to where it's needed quickly. Another example was a community round we ran for community groups in the city of Oakland that was funded by the government of Oakland, a small grant that they put towards sort of testing out this tooling, and was a great way to just like onboard a bunch of young people in Oakland to Web3 tools in the process. So, definitely there's nothing about these structures that, stop them from being useful to real world activity. And in fact, a lot of what John and Tara work on and get funded through Gitcoin grants and other grant mechanisms, is real world stuff, like putting solar panels on a school in Eastern Africa and in various different places. John's done a bunch of interesting work like that.
Super interesting. So the just to summarize it, the technology itself it's super versatile, right? Like it can be used for real world projects, it can be used for open source projects. I'm wondering, John, if there's anything you want to add there in terms of the kind of real world projects you've seen getting funded through the Gitcoin grants rounds.
Yeah, I think particularly with our climate round, we do see a lot more IRL projects just because for the most part, software is not going to solve our problems. There's maybe a few exceptions where software can help, but it's not going to be the root solver of our climate problem here. And so we do have all these projects that really are doing everything from, we see a lot of like regenerative agriculture kinds of projects that are kind of a combination of tree growing, planting, and education kinds of things, which I think are really interesting. My project that Ben was mentioning, the Solar Foundation, we have raised over $100,000 in crypto and between Gitcoin and other means, and have been funding small solar installations across Africa. For us, it's partially about that work, but also how does a small nonprofit begin to use these tools in a meaningful way? And so that is part of our experiment as an organization, is both the core work of funding the solar, but also what can we learn from it, and then share with both our partners that we're working with on these solar projects, but also any other nonprofit that may want to utilize these tools in the future. So yeah, I think there's a lot more IRL, but I think we still have a long way to go to really unlock all of the funding opportunities that there are out there for more open source software kinds of projects that just aren't quite opened up yet for IRL work. Things like, like Optimism a while back, a few months ago, did their most recent round of retroactive public goods funding. But that was really all for digital public goods. And while those are great, and I love seeing devs get paid, and I would love to see more devs, driving around in Lambos and bragging about how much money they make as devs, like keeping this stuff running. To me, the real excitement is like, can we come up with $120 million retroactive fund to fund real world public goods? Can we do that to fund these kinds of projects that I'm talking about? And that's what really has me excited long term. And I think we're going to get there. It's just lagging. And I think part of that comes down to really the connection between the real world and the digital world, particularly around impact and quantifying the real world thing on the blockchain in a way that then it can really be both funded through grant funding, but also potentially other ways. So I think we're getting there, but that's some of this, I guess, sort of the barriers I see to that. But is a lot of why I'm in this space. Like at the end of the day, if all we're going to do is build a bunch of new software, like that's kind of fun and all, but like that's not going to solve the world's problems. And some of my core thinking and a lot of this is really modeled after like Owaki and listening to a million of his talks and things. But climate change, for example, is one of the world's largest coordination failures, and this technology has the ability to help us coordinate worldwide, borderlessly, in new ways that just aren't possible without it, in my eyes. And so we haven't seen what that looks like in the long term, but I truly believe that is the way we can really begin to coordinate capital through various funding mechanisms into real world impact that actually is going to solve for the world's problems.
I would also just say that coordinating the capital is super important. But we spent the last couple of years writing this report about how blockchain can actually enable climate solutions, and from there we've created a bunch of assets so that blockchain can actually be used for various things in supply chains and in decentralized energy and stuff. So, I mean, the actual blockchain can be part of the solution as well as the capital that's needed to fund those real world solutions.
Cool. So I think your vision for the use of grants funding at the intersection between the real world and the digital world is something that resonates with me a lot, and I think it's something within the VDAO community that we're really interested in experimenting with and exploring in the future as well. I'm curious though, just to move on to double click a bit on the actual mechanisms. We've kind of touched on this a bit with quadratic voting, but I'm wondering if you guys would be able to give us a kind of overview of the different types of mechanisms like conviction voting and other types of voting mechanisms that might be useful for funding in the real world or in the digital world.
Oh man, that's a juicy question. Do you guys mind if I jump in?
Yeah, go for it.
So yeah, I mean, even within quadratic funding, there's a variety of flavors, and I won't take us too far down that rabbit hole, but like there's definitely a big difference between pluralistic QF and what I call vanilla QF. Really it's just the way that the algorithm's looking for groupings of people. So are you sort of rewarding people for having a more diverse set of funders, or are you limiting the amount any individual grantee can raise? There's rabbit holes upon rabbit holes to go down, even just within the quadratic funding space. And if anybody wants to dive deeper into that, I would just suggest going to the governance forum at gitcoingov.gitcoin.co. You'll find tons of stuff in past round descriptions and discussion in the kind of grants category, where the team has kind of experimented with different funding methodologies, which, by the way, all of this came from work that Radical Exchange did with Vitalik. Basically, the quadratic funding work that Gitcoin did all came out of a white paper that Vitalik and Glenn Weil and Zoe from Radical Exchange put together years ago. Now going on 5+ years of running quarterly rounds, the 20th one happening right now. And then, taking a step outside of the world of quadratic funding, though, I'm glad you brought up conviction voting. There's also a lot of different flavors of conviction voting. I'm a big fan of the methodology that a company called Ethelo uses, which is actually somewhere that Tara and I both used to work. Fun fact, that's a whole other story. But they have a methodology that is similar to conviction voting, where you're basically not just saying whether you're for or against something, but you're allocating a certain amount of votes to a limited number of options. What Ethelo does is it also adds this idea of being able to vote in favor or against things. So, having sort of negative or positive conviction. And they've developed an algorithm that is actually looking for not just the most popular projects, but also the least unpopular. So you're looking for a way to basically solve a problem that meets a certain set of conditions, but do it in a way that is not only the most popular possible, but also the least divisive or the least problematic. And of course, there's been lots of different versions of direct democracy, in places like Brazil, with citizens' assemblies, and within those different kinds of governance frameworks. I mean, basically all grant making is some form of a decision making and governance process. So really you can't have a meaningful conversation about grant making without having a conversation about governance at some level. Because ultimately you're taking a set of limited resources and deciding how to allocate them, and trying to take some input from community about how they'd like to see that done. And that can be a very grueling process where you're looking for consensus, where like literally any one person can veto something. There's the whole world of Robert's Rules of Order style decision making, where you kind of create a whole sort of legalistic framework and many different variations of that. Things like conviction voting or other methods similar to kind of like electoral processes, where you're doing like ranked ballots or, other forms of like sortition. We could talk for hours about all the different flavors. But I think ultimately it comes down to, just who are you listening to? How are you weighting their opinions? Is it kind of a one size fits all thing? Is everybody's vote equal? If not, how do you decide how much weight you give to different opinions? Quadratic voting, is sort of somewhere in the middle. Like the idea is that you're harnessing the wisdom of the crowd, and you're sort of democratizing the decision of how funds will be allocated, because it's not a matching fund where $1 donated equals $1 matched. Tara mentioned how many people just donate $1. The reason for that is because the quadratic funding algorithm more heavily weights the number of contributors that a person has versus the number of dollars that they've had donated. So it gives more power to the individual and sort of disempowers whales. That being said, it does not do it entirely. You still, if you go and donate a large amount of money, can have a pretty outsized impact on how funds are distributed. It really just depends on sort of how many participants there are and how much money is being donated. So anyway, I could ramble on about this for a while, but I hopefully at least gave you a sort of picture of the landscape.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's a super interesting area, and I'd love to dive deeper into that at some point in the future. I think today we'll move on and look at a little bit more at the outcomes, like how do we measure outcomes, maybe touch a bit on hypercerts. I'm noticing that a couple of people want to come up with questions. We're going to leave space for that in about 10 minutes. We'll break for a Q&A. We'll move to a Q&A, so we'll invite you up at that point. But I've got another couple of questions to ask our panel. The next one is around, like, as I was saying, around the outcomes. So how are outcomes measured in the Web3 grants funding space to make sure that the funds that are being distributed are actually being well spent and going to where the grantees say that they were going to spend the funds? Yeah. How are outcomes measured?
I think one thing to note, though it isn't perfect, is that given that the funding is on chain, at least to some extent, you can track the funds from the time you send them to a wallet, and see where they go. Of course, if they go straight to Coinbase and are off ramped to dollars, then pretty quickly you can't track that anymore. So that only gets you so far. But I think that is one unique feature of crypto compared to traditional grant making programs. And then it again depends program to program how sort of updates are provided. With Gitcoin grants, all the funds are distributed at the end of the round, and then we really look to the next round to get some updates from the grantees and hear what they've been up to and the work they've been done, and hopefully see some meaningful proof of that, and that can vary. But I know you're going to maybe head into the hypercerts and other things, so maybe I'll just mention, we also are beginning to have some great on-chain tools which can help for our grantees to really talk about that impact and about the work that they're doing with the funds, whether it's using Karma Gaps tools, which allow you to create some milestones and provide some public updates, as well as some high level sort of impact for the project. So some different ways to illustrate that work, that, Climate Coordination Network, for example, can utilize that as a way to decide whether to let folks into future rounds and whether it appears that the people are using the funds as they said they would. And then you have things like hypercerts, which are an interesting new protocol that allows you to, or newer, it's been around now for a little bit, but allows you to make claims of impact. So really looking at maybe a little more high level that your project did, X project or had X like larger impact. The hypercert might be a meaningful way to document that. And then there's some tools. One of the things that we built at Spark, which is the other company that I'm building, is called Daracy, which is a review tool for hypercerts. So then allows for both project owners to review their hypercerts and that claim of impact they've made, but also third parties to go in and make some evaluations. And so, again, climate coordination, for example, can utilize those tools to both look at the external evaluations from a project, but also can conduct third-party evaluations, either with our own team or another team that's appropriate, to really look at that. So, I think that's probably the kind of the core of how we track. Still, there is a lot of trusting the grantee that they're saying they're doing X, and you're seeing some pictures and you're seeing some things. And at the end of the day, there is still a level of trust that's required. But the tools are getting better and better. And there's, again, that's sort of where that connection between the real world and the digital world is still not, fully built. And so there's still some things that are happening in the real world that we really can't show in a meaningful way on chain yet.
Thanks, John. I think the transparency element of the blockchain, I guess, comes into play here. You've introduced the hypercert concept, and I'll come to Ben in a moment. I'm sure he might have some more to say on that. But I'm also wanting to pick up on a point you made earlier about the retroactive public goods funding. So in that scenario, there might be a round that's looking back on what has been done previously, and if grants are being issued in that context, it's clear like the objectives of that project have been reached and some meaningful impact has been achieved through that project, and the funds are distributed retroactively.
Correct. Did you want me to touch on that, or I can wait? I'm sorry if there may have been a question coming. I may have jumped in.
It's all good. I want to give Ben a chance to jump in on hypercerts, but if you have anything to say on retroactive funding, I'd love to hear more about that as well.
Yeah, I was just going to quickly plug that idea a little further in the same context that with retroactive funding, you really are looking at what's already happened and then funding that accordingly. And so that's when these tools become even more important, is to really get a better sense of what projects are doing so that they can be retroactively funded. And that is partly why we're seeing more of that happening in the digital space, where, for example, you can go into a GitHub and see how much activity is happening. You can go and look at how many active daily users maybe an app has, or there's so many more on-chain metrics that can be captured and that data pulled in, that painting that picture of the work that a digital product has done is easier than that real world project. But definitely we'll hand it over to Ben on hypercerts, and he'll probably give us some good alpha around Thrive and maybe and how we might see some of these things used in the future, maybe at least Karma Gap.
John, you know me too well, sir, and I promise I won't ramble on as long this time. We've got to make sure we leave time for other people to come up and talk to. I just want to throw out what I'm excited about in terms of what's going on at Thrive Protocol, which is basically we're adding a validation verification layer, which is done through a mixture of automated validations as well as human validation, starting with the Gitcoin grants round as kind of like one of the first experiments that we're doing. I should say, at least that I'm doing. Thrive Protocol's been doing this for a while already at this point. But we are really trying to bring some of the stuff that I've wished existed at Gitcoin for a while to the table. And right now the way that we're doing that is using a tool called Karma Gap, at least for the Gitcoin grants round, where people set milestones for themselves, and then we have that validated by human validators who are paid a reward for doing that work. And we're giving different types of validators different badges, probably using HATS protocol at some point, but at the moment just using a badging system on our own platform. And this will give us the ability to really just like at scale be able to have people do attestations of the quality and validity of work that's been done. And when you scale that up in a decentralized way, you can sort of imagine a much larger group of people that is earning rewards for offering their insights and opinions and perspectives on a range of different projects. And we're building integrations with lots of different tools. So, Karma Gap was just one example. Been talking about doing stuff with Darcy, with Alphilla, who I just talked about, and many others. So, if any or all of this is interesting to you, super excited to talk about all of this, as you may have noticed. And, to me, like once those validations are done and you increasingly build that on-chain reputation and history, from these attestations that are coming from these various different protocols, that just opens up a whole new world of much easier eligibility decisions about retroactive funding, and any number of other things. When you're creating a new network state community somewhere, maybe you want to highlight people who have certain skill sets or have done good work and can be attested to by others. So I just think there's a massive space that's opening up right now around impact assessments and attestations. And I'm pretty excited about what Thrive Protocol is doing to really kind of just like take the money that we're getting from communities to help them build and put a big chunk of it into like creating these feedback loops that I think can be really essential to the really having a sense of how money was spent and how to do it more effectively and efficiently as we iterate.
Cool. It sounds like there's a lot happening in that space, and particularly with the attestations and Thrive being at the heart of that. I want to just share one final question with you guys before we move to open up the floor to anyone else who wants to come up and ask questions. And that's around, just to wrap things up and bring focus back onto the round that's active right now. I'm wondering if you guys have noticed whether there's anything different about this round, any different types of projects that are coming up, anything you've noticed, like any trends that are emerging with this round compared to previous rounds. And curious to hear your thoughts briefly on this before we move to audience questions.
I'm trying to not eat up all the oxygen here. So John or Tara, if either of you. Okay, well, I'll kick us off and I'll keep it short. Honestly, every round we see different trends emerging in terms of the different things that builders are focusing on. Right now, Gitcoin is really doubling down on open source software. So, just in terms of like Gitcoin itself, there's really this kind of return to core principles of like really focusing first and foremost on running open source software rounds and funding kind of the core infrastructure of Web3. And because of the grant stack tools being decentralized, like one of the amazing things that we're seeing is just like a ton of different rounds being run by community members on their own. And to like watch that just evolve in front of our eyes is a totally fascinating thing, because there's all these different experiments people are doing. Sometimes they're happening simultaneously with the quarterly rounds that Gitcoin creates, and you kind of ride that wave of the like 30 to 50,000 people who participate every quarter. And some folks are doing it completely on their own, and a lot of the time we don't even know about it happening. So I'm really just like I think the novel mechanisms that we're seeing emerge, like things like streaming funding and ways to donate directly from Web3 social applications, like inside of Farcaster, for example, that is one trend line that I've been particularly interested in. We talked a lot about impact certificates, but definitely we're seeing a lot of people building in that space. Haven't seen as much activity around oracles as we have in some past rounds, but definitely bringing real world data on chain, is a pretty key piece of many of these things, and a lot of the work that Tara and I were doing for the Ethereum Foundation was like looking at things like supply chain management on chain and ways that you can bring real world data from sensors or from other trusted sources like satellite data, for example. I think there's a ton of opportunity in terms of like sort of bridging real world assets and as well as real world information on chain and doing many different types of things with that. So I would say lots of different trends. I would say one last one, and I said I wasn't going to talk that much, and I just keep talking. It's been a long day. Is bridging.
It's great. It's great.
Interoperability. Like it just seems to me like there's kind of this expansion and then contraction that seems to happen in the Web3 world. Like we see more and more like layer 2 blockchains, even layer 3 blockchains, and various different kinds of roll-ups, and and then at the same time there's increasingly all these like layer 2 to layer 2 exchanges and interoperability, and everybody's app needs to be able to work with various different chains and make the user experience less problematic for people. So it's an interesting sort of like push and pull of like innovation and like expansion, but also just like trying to meet the needs of the users. And it seems to me as a funder that we see a lot of stuff that's coming forward that's about building bridges, not just in the sense of like bridging between one network and another, but really just like building the composability and interoperability between various different applications. And often that's like applications that are on different networks, but there's some benefit to like tying a DeFi protocol to any number of other things like an impact attestation or various other tools. So I would say if there was any trend that I'm noticing in particular right now, it's probably that move towards trying to find ways to make everything more interoperable, composable, and easier to use. Maybe that's just my projection of what I hope is happening.
I'd also say that a slight thing that I'm noticing, having watched this particularly, is that people that are coming from another place, like that haven't had anything to do with Web3, are oftentimes so stumped by what they're seeing and have no idea how to do anything, and they're starting to make a lot of noise. So I've seen the UX improving because people really don't know what's going on a lot of the time if they're not already in this world and they're trying to get in. And just like Ben says about the bridging, I mean, it's so super important to be able to speak to people in other worlds other than this one world, or this world will never expand.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. We need to improve the UX, and that's actually, we're kind of looking ahead to next month that we're going to have a spaces on this topic, looking at how can we make Web3 more accessible. And I guess there's an overlap here with the grants space, because if we want to see grants being rolled out in real world communities, a lot of those people in those communities are never going to have perhaps interacted with Web3 before, so we need to make the UX as intuitive as possible. Cool, so thanks for your patience. I know a couple of people had requested to come up and ask questions. I'd like to invite you forward to do that. I think, Civil, you had waited patiently for a while to come in there. Do you have a question for the panel?
Hi. Yeah, thank you so much for the space. It's great to see you all again and hear from you all. So one thing on the topic of funding and Web3 funding, just in terms of framing and sort of knowing what model is what, I see a lot of convolutedness around that, where people think, oh, this is how it should be. And maybe on a moral, ethical level, yes, that's how it should be. But also on a structural model level, maybe this is not the model that is for that. So what I'm saying is, especially when we're talking about like social impact, positive impact, climate action, and whatever term you want to use, that often people are like, okay, so what's making the biggest difference? Who's making the most impact on the ground? That's the project. That's the people who should get the most funds. It's nice, and I get where that's coming from. Sort of basing the funding on the impact, but that's not what quadratic funding was built for. Like I get that, and I agree with the sentiment, but the model of quadratic funding is for allocating and distributing matching funds. Quadratic funding is democratizing the allocation of matching pool funds, and that is from the basis, just from thinking about it in the abstract, that is not necessarily in that it doesn't have to be correlated to what the project does. So I think that's just important to understand. Yes, we would maybe like it to be that way, and we want to build structures and ways of inviting people to make their decision on the basis of that, and sort of to do things that outcome does display some kind of correlation from impact to funding. But I think just thinking about quadratic funding and what it is and what it was developed for, it was developed to democratize allocation of matching pool funds, period. And it's not an investment. It's not a rewarding for impact. It can be used for that, and it can be thought of in that way, maybe. But on the very basic level, that's how I understood QF. By the way, another question. Maybe Ben, you can help me with this one. In the QF paper, the two letters QF were not used for quadratic funding, but for quadratic finance. I was wondering, maybe do you have a story of how that developed over time?
That's a great question. I wasn't around for the early days where the sort of language shifted. I just wanted to double tap on what you were saying. I mean, basically the quadratic funding mechanism is a tool, and it really very much just depends on the people using it and how they use it. I think the question of how are the funds allocated and is it well spent is kind of just the natural evolution of that mechanism. As somebody who's gone and raised that money from people that then was given away, I can tell you that before people give the money, the number one question is always, how do I know that the money's going to be well spent? And often that's kind of the ongoing conversation after the fact is they want more information. So I would say there's the tech itself and what it does is one thing. And then there's kind of what network effects are created, or sort of what conversations are started because of running a quadratic funding round. And to me, that's where the kind of question about how were the funds allocated becomes important, because if you're looking for people who are going to continue to trust in quadratic funding and fund it, you need to be able to answer that question. And I would say that's even true if you're talking about some sort of automated drip that's coming out of some Web3 mechanism, say, for example, people running nodes like Octant and putting that money towards funding whatever it is that they decide to fund. There's still groups of human beings that are making a decision to set up that technology to direct the funds in the way that is being described. Don't have a huge insight for you in terms of how it got from finance to funding. I'm guessing that was probably just the a walkie meme machine doing what it does, kind of playing with words and finding the ones that stick and sort of figuring out how to describe what they were doing.
Cool. Thanks a lot for your question, Civil. I'm conscious that we're running short on time, so I'm going to hop on to the next speaker who's wanted to ask a question. Hero, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me. I just want a quick word to say thank you, John and Ben, for what you guys are doing at Gitcoin, because I look to your experiments for inspirations for our sort of small grant at the Bitcoin layer 2. stacks, and I really loved like there's a lot of infrastructure that you guys are trying to build in toolings, and I often look around for those stuff to see what we can use as well. So thank you guys. But quick question for you guys. So because we have a small fund, sort of experimental fund, and we're growing that, and we're looking to experiment with retroactive funding as well. Like, do you advise like a small fund to experiment with different schemes like retroactive funding, and or if you can pick like one or two, what would you advise like to experiment with apart from just an open application? Thank you.
Like for this, you're saying for your project, if you were going to build out a grant program, what would we recommend as a place to start? Okay. I would say that, I think out of the box, Gitcoin's tools would allow you to run rounds, Gitcoin style rounds, but for your project. I think that's a great place to start, and those tools are getting easier and easier to use. And so that's one place. I think to some extent, until you have enough happening in your ecosystem, retro funding doesn't make as much sense to me, just in the sense that you kind of have to have enough of a body of work that's completed that then you want to reward. And while that keeps people in your ecosystem, I don't think it brings people to your ecosystem for the most part. It's going to kind of be the people that are already there. And so I think you'd want to run more like forward funding programs like a Gitcoin or a direct grants program. Even if you don't want to do the quadratic funding, you could just run a direct grants program that, we're giving away $100,000, 10 grants of $10,000 or something like that, and has some criteria and things like that. But I would recommend a forward funding kind of program like that, where you're bringing new builders into the Stacks ecosystem to build on Stacks and to keep building out new products and new communities. And then as that grows, then I think as a step 2 would move into retro, but that would be my high level. I know we're running close on time. I don't know, Ben, if you've got a 60-second, but if not, I know also we got Carbon Counting Club, James McGee up here, and I don't know if there's anybody else we're going to try and get to. So
I would just say also thank Tara. She worked really hard in the last couple of years too. I just know Tara well enough to know that she's thinking that right now.
Oh, well, if you are, that I know that that I love all the work that you're doing, and I'm incredibly inspired not only with working with you at CCN, but
I didn't mean you, John. Hero, thank both of us.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, I don't think I did. That's what I was thinking. I said, did I leave her out? If I did, I certainly didn't mean to.
Not you, sir. Not you. I just felt the need to say that because, so often women's work doesn't get recognized in the same way. And Tara is such a badass. She deserves the credit. Even though she was working on the climate team, not directly for Gitcoin, she's done a tremendous amount to help move Gitcoin and the community forward. I just would agree with what you said, John. I think a lot really just depends on the community you're working with and what its needs are, the number of grantees you're trying to serve. There's actually a guide that some of our old friends from Gitcoin are putting together based on the business model canvas, if anybody's familiar with that, for helping to design a grants program, looking at different mechanisms and sort of trying to get a sense of like all the key questions about like what it is you're trying to do, what you're reverse engineering, and then sort of helps you kind of align what it is that you're trying to build with with what mechanism might be most effective for you. So yeah, long story short, that could be a very helpful way to answer that question. And maybe I should have said short story long.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks a lot for your question. I love how flexible the Gitcoin grant stack's becoming as well, in that like anyone who's got a fund can come and like spin up their own round by the sounds of it from what you guys are saying, which is really, really exciting actually for the Web3 space. So I'm conscious that we're running over time. We've got a couple of other speakers to come up. I just want to check in with John and Ben and Tara. Are you guys happy to run over for another 5 minutes or so, or do you need to shoot?
It's fine with me.
Okay, great.
I'm okay for 5.
Okay, perfect. So I'd like to come to you first, Max. if you'd like to come forward and ask your question to the panel, that'd be great.
Yeah. Firstly, thanks so much for this talk. It's late here, but it's excellent bedtime listening. But I'm a first-time applicant to this program, so I just wondered if anyone had any advice for putting a first application in.
Oh man, all these juicy questions that we could talk for like an hour about each one.
I've got maybe a fairly easy answer, Ben, just to keep things rolling.
Do it,
you can, if you go to the climate coordination webpage, which is climatecoordination.org, we've got a good guide that our team had written about that, and I think that would provide you with a lot of tips. But I also would say I know that my DMs are open, and I hate to say anybody else's are, but I think probably Ben's are too. So, happy to have you at least start there, and then drop me a note, and happy to, read a draft or provide any other tips to get you going.
Is this specifically climate-wise?
It's climate. It's a climate game, actually.
You should. There's all kinds of. We also have something on there that's called the Metric Garden, which will give you a whole bunch of stuff about how to measure the metrics of impact for anything that you're putting in as a grant. So you could take a look at that. It's on the website, and you can just click through to it.
Sweet.
And Tara has spent hours and hours working on that that amazing directory of impact, and so we'll certainly give you a shout out for that. As people read through that, know that Tara put a lot of work into that.
It's not done yet either, and there's one of the things that's specifically towards your question, if putting in a game, is that we don't have any metrics around that specifically, but would be interested in developing more, because we're constantly trying to put more and more things in, depending upon what people are working on and what they need help with in terms of being able to measure their impact.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks for that, Max. I'm going to come to Carbon Counting Club in a moment, but I know you've got your hand up, Civil. If you've got a brief follow-up point to make, and you're welcome to come forward.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just gonna be the direct annoying person who's gonna say what Eurogamer is too polite to say. Because John, you mentioned you can just use Gitcoin tools, which is true for EVM. But when we're talking about in Bitcoin L2, how, John, would you think about using existing QF infrastructure, or in general, how do you think about QF infra outside of EVM? Curious to hear those thoughts, as Eurogamer with Natalie Crew has designed and executed pretty well the decentralized grants program I don't know. It was within the last 10 months. I can say that with high.
Yeah, we ran it in December, the first round, and we're running the second round right now, a sort of improved version, if you like. But each sort of category, so they have pretty autonomous decision power to design. However, we let them design the program, even basically.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll let Ben chime in as well. But yeah, that Gitcoin is EVM centric, and so the tools that they're building for the most part are just for the EVM. I know that Near recently has built some products around quadratic funding. I haven't seen it. Don't think anything on Solana yet, but I imagine that somebody's probably working on that. But I've not seen any action on any sort of Bitcoin or Bitcoin L2. So I think probably the in between is sort of how you're doing it now, where you're sort of doing it off chain, I assume, to some extent, and then paying out on chain, obviously. But another one where I'd be happy to, I've been following you guys peripherally, but I have not dug into the details of either the first round or the second, but have been aware that it was happening. But be happy to grab some time and chat about what you all have done and provide any feedback that might be helpful.
I was just going to throw in check out what Radical Exchange has on their site. They've got a bunch of QF tools that you can play with that are not on chain, but they can do all kinds of useful things. And I would also throw in their open source tools. Ask not what Grant Stack can do for you, but ask what you can do for Gitcoin. I would love to see more people forking and building, different versions of the same tools. CLR Fund also has, their own set of tools. A lot of this stuff is happening on the EVM, but definitely will not be the case for much longer. I'm hoping somebody in the Cosmos ecosystem starts picking up and building some of this stuff. And the DevRel team there is, especially with the transition to LOV2, which is like the new version of the Gitcoin protocol. You can do a lot if you've got some resources to put towards it and some developers who are interested in doing it. So don't hesitate to reach out to the team at Gitcoin if you're interested in building your own thing on another network, because I think they'd actually be quite eager to be helpful as much as they can.
Great. Thanks a lot, guys, for these really interesting questions. Like that point about Bitcoin and the L2 and the open source aspect of Gitcoin is super interesting. I think there's so many topics that have come up, we could probably make several other spaces out of these topics alone. So thanks a lot, guys. Let's come to Carbon Counting Club just to finish off with a final question.
I actually just wanted to let you guys know that there are still, like, the Fractal Vision round is still open for applications. I'm not sure if the Earth or the Earth rounds are open, but they were open recently. And the Climate Network is accepting late applications with no promise of reviewer entry. So if people are out there and they're still looking for help, get involved, put in your applications, ask questions. If you don't get in this round, you'll be more prepared for the next one.
I agree with the sentiment. And I just want to add that MA Earth, has closed applications. Smart contract has shut down the openness, the ability to submit applications Saturday night. So the other ones are probably all still open to submitting at least. So yeah, and I'm also happy to talk. And if I don't get back to you, please annoy me.
I think most of the community rounds and Gitcoin's main round, I think applications are open till the 27th on all of those. It's possible that some of those set those to end a little earlier, but I believe so everything from the ENS, the Open Civics, the Climate, the Hypercerts, and there's a fifth one that I am not coming up with right this second, but and then the open source software round. So and we're almost through, at least on the climate side, we're almost through with our reviews. So certainly if we do get some late applications, it's not going to take us too long to get those reviewed. Can't promise it will be approved, but certainly will get reviewed fairly quickly.
I'm pretty sure that Open Civics, I mean, I would still check out Open Civics and maybe even apply, but Open Civics, I'm pretty sure, is set on the amount that they want to approve, and they have selected those and announced those yesterday or the day before. So I don't think they're going to approve any more grantees for this specific round, but still cool people. And I know there's some great things going on between certain rounds where if they see a certain grantee and are like, well, this is a great grantee, but we're not able to get them within the number that we want to accept. But maybe this other round that we know is also doing something, maybe we hand them over there, which I really, really appreciate, because, if that's happening between round operators, that's amazing.
Cool. Thanks a lot, guys, for the discussion and for the questions. It's really interesting to hear from the community about the process, and I feel like the discussion we've had today we could go on for the next hour at least. So that's great. I just want to take this opportunity to thank our guests, Tara, Ben, and John for joining this Twitter Spaces today, especially at this time where you've got so much going on with this round and stuff. I'm really, really grateful that you chose to join us. Apologies if there's anyone else out there who's wanted to ask a question. We've just run out of time, and I don't want to take up any more of these guys' time at this busy moment in the grants round. So if you do have any other questions, or feel free to join the VDAO Discord, and we can continue the conversation in there. We've also got a Twitter Spaces planned for next month with other guests, that'll be getting announced soon. And we've got weekly events happening inside VDAO, including learning events in numerous different areas: regenerative agriculture, more high tech focus. Our next learning event is on drones and drone mapping next week. We've also got a community voices event on water management, water security, and innovative low tech solutions to improve the flow of water across the land, water storage, and things like that. So please do follow us on Twitter and join our Discord. And also please follow all our guests. They're doing some amazing work in the Web3 funding space, and be sure to follow them on Twitter and keep up to date with all they're doing, because they're doing fantastic work in the Web3 space. And it's been a pleasure to talk with you guys today. So thanks a lot, everyone.
Cheers, y'all.